Good afternoon, and welcome to the America East Conference's episode 8 of our Spread Respect Conversations. My name is Marcus Bishop, and I'm Director of Sport Engagement and Administration here at the conference. We are very excited to have you here for this educational opportunity and look forward to the conversation between our panelists and our moderator today, Kate Bergstrom from our office. We are very excited for this conversation because it is a topic that comes directly from feedback we received from both our student athletes and the surveys that we administered during these conversations. Mental health in the Black experience is an important topic that we want to dive into, and it's a great crossover episode for us, thinking about our Better Together initiative focusing on mental health and our Spread Respect initiative focusing on social justice and the Black experience. We are very excited to have you here today. Per our usual conversations, we do have a Q&A function that we'd love for you to participate in and share your thoughts and questions with both our moderator and our guests. So please do not feel free to be shy about sharing your thoughts and questions in that Q&A function. If you'd like to submit your questions anonymously, you could do that as well. So please feel free to participate. As always, we do have a survey, and we encourage you to complete that at the end of this conversation. We love to hear your feedback, and we think it's valuable to us moving forward with these conversations. So you'll see in the chat that Kate has shared a link so that you can submit your feedback after the episode. We'll also make sure to share it again at the end, and then you'll also see it pop up once we close out the webinar today. So we thank you for your feedback and look forward to you pressing that link. Before we get into our episode today, I want to highlight a new webinar series that we have specifically for our coaches, our staff, and administrators at our campuses to build resiliency as we're talking about mental health. We have a two-part series that we have teamed up with MindWise to provide educational resources for our coaches, our administrators, and staff. Our first webinar is Tuesday, March 2nd at 12 p.m. And part one is focusing on bolstering student athlete mental health in uncertain times. You'll see on the screen a sample of some of the topics that we'll discuss during this webinar, and we encourage you to sign up. You'll see in the chat that there is a registration link for that, and we encourage you to do that. Additionally, we have a second part on Tuesday, April 6th at 12 p.m., where we're really talking about how self-care isn't selfish, and you should really do a great job of taking care of yourself as you take care of others. And again, you'll see some of the sample topics we have there for part 2 of this webinar series. And we again encourage you to register, and we have shared that link in the chat function as well. We're very excited to have our two presenters from MindWise team up with this to really give our coaches, administrators, and staff an opportunity to have these conversations about building resiliency and sharing that with their student athletes and taking care of themselves. So we hope that you'll take time to register for these two webinars. We think it's going to be a great educational opportunity for those involved. Additionally, as we've mentioned in the past, we've redesigned our website and we have a hub for our Spread Respect initiative. Since we're talking about mental health today, we also have a spot for our Better Together initiative. A lot of the content we've shared over the last couple of years is housed there at americaeast.com/bettertogether. We encourage you to check out that link and see some of the resources that we've provided over the times regarding mental health. And then lastly, we talked about joining the conversation. We ask that you join the conversation via social media as well, using the hashtag #SpreadRespect. As you have takeaways from this conversation, great ideas, things that you want to do, we encourage you to share that via your social media channels using hashtag #SpreadRespect. So don't be shy. Go ahead and share what you're taking away from these conversations in real time. With that being said, again, we are very excited for this panel and our moderator. I will turn it over to Kate Bergstrom, Senior Associate Commissioner from the America East Conference, to take us away.
Thanks, Marcus. Appreciate the intro and the plugs on the MindWise webinars that we have coming up this spring. Really thrilled to be here with you all today. I am lucky enough to have the chance to help facilitate this conversation, but I'm also planning to be a very active listener and play the role of an audience member too, so that we can really highlight Joyce, Tony, and Hannah. So I'm going to introduce our 3 esteemed panelists, and then we're going to jump right in and use the next 55 minutes here to break down some of the aspects of Black student athlete and coach mental health experience and dig a little bit deeper, try to get the questions that you all have been asking from the membership, at least touched on by our three panelists here. So first we have Joyce DeWitt Parker. Dr. DeWitt Parker is currently the Assistant Vice President of Student Affairs, Health and Wellbeing at the University of Albany. Dr. DeWitt Parker provides leadership for counseling and psychological services, student health services, the Advocacy Center for Sexual Violence, the Center for Behavior, Health and Promotion and Applied Research, and campus recreation. She is responsible for the comprehensive and seamless provision of services across physical, mental, and behavioral health and recreation, with a focus on driving innovation through evidence-based practice, as well as the management of risk. Prior to this role, Dr. DeWitt Parker was a clinical director at Albany's Counseling and Psychological Services, overseeing 19 staff members and caring for a campus community of over 17,000. Dr. DeWitt Parker received her PhD from the University at Albany in 1999 and has been a licensed psychologist ever since. Dr. DeWitt Parker is largely responsible for bridging the gap between CAPS and athletics at the University at Albany, as she is incredibly passionate about the student athlete experience. America East and I personally have been lucky enough to work with Dr. DeWitt Parker over the years, and can't tell you how much we're thrilled to have you here with us today, Joyce. Our second panelist is Tony Diallo. Tony is a sophomore men's lacrosse student athlete at UMBC. Tony is a biology major and is currently working with an organization that trains service dogs for veterans. Tony is originally from Maryland and has one older sister. Tony was named to the 2020 College Cross All Freshman Honorable Mention team. Tony also sits on the America East Student Athlete of Color Leadership Group and has been a very vocal advocate of mental health. And then third, we have Hannah Geller. Hannah is currently a senior women's soccer student athlete at Stony Brook University. Hannah is the co-president of PAWS, which stands for Positive Assurance with Support, an organization at Stony Brook which promotes mental health among student athletes. Hannah is originally from Monroe, New York, and is majoring in business with a minor in health and wellness. So Tony, Hannah, and Joyce, thanks so much for being here today. We're excited to have everyone get to know you better. I am going to jump in right off the start with the NCAA survey that was conducted in the early spring, right when the pandemic hit. And in that survey of over 37,000 student athletes that responded, it showed that Black student athletes were disproportionately negatively affected by mental health. I just want to start with that simple fact and that research point and open up to the panel and see, what are your reactions to this data? Does it resonate with your personal experience? And just take some thoughts to start us off.
Okay, well, I'll just jump in, but certainly Hannah and Tony, you jump in as well. You know, when I think about this, there's no surprise for me, because when I think about race, it's a socio-political construct, number one. And, you know, I think one of the primary functions of race is racism. And when I think about what's happening in the Black community and the brown community at this point, when you think about COVID, you know, the Black and brown communities are disproportionately affected in a negative way. And the same is true for mental health. You know, health disparities in general tend to fall, not always, but along sociopolitical lines as well, racism being one of those. So in a way, it doesn't surprise me, because I think of this as a public health crisis as well. And it's been a 400-year public health crisis, if you will, if you think about racism that way.
Thanks, Joyce.
I agree with what Joyce said. I'm not very shocked with those results. I think, especially for students who go to a PWI, it's a lot. You're faced with a lot of challenges throughout your athletic career. And I think racism is always something that you deal with, whether you're in college or just living your normal life. So just stack that onto the table, it kind of puts more than the normal amount of odds against you.
Yeah, as well as, you know, like the stigma around mental health in those specific communities. And, you know, just, I don't know, being Black, like there are more things that you're like concerned about, you know, that you think about more and more, you know, worried about than taking the time to like worry about your mental health. But it's also something that like isn't talked about enough.
I want to talk about stigma. So thanks for bringing that up, Tony. A quote that I had pulled out from an article on the Black Mental Health Alliance shared that in research studies, Black individuals have indicated that mild depression and anxiety is often viewed as crazy in their social circles. Talk to me a little bit about the different and unique challenges that the Black community faces as it relates to stigma, which we know exists across mental health for all individuals. But let's talk specifically about the Black community and the impact of that stigma.
Somebody else want to start this time, or would you like me to?
I can start. For me and my background, my parents have been very supportive with any mental health issues that I have struggled with in the past. So I have not firsthand dealt with it, but I definitely have had a lot of Black friends that parents, don't really believe in it. And, they think, just go take a nap. It's nothing that really affects you, and it shouldn't, and you're too strong to be having mental health issues, or they're not real. And especially my Black guy friends, they're definitely looked at as weak and not as strong for dealing with some of the things that they deal with throughout the day, being mental health issues. So it's kind of sad to see that this is an issue that goes on in the Black community, but I think it is starting to change and develop into something different.
Yeah, like Hannah was saying, like it's viewed as a weakness. Both of my parents are immigrants. My mom's from Jamaica, and my dad's from Guinea in West Africa. And, especially with my dad, like, he doesn't, I don't want to say he doesn't believe in that, but it's viewed as a weakness in his culture. And his ideology is just, move on. Like you don't really talk about it. You just put it to the side. You got to keep going. My life moves on. So you never really address what's going on, and eventually rears its ugly head later. But I think that stigma of it being viewed as a weakness has like a big effect, especially being an athlete. Like you're not supposed to have any weaknesses. So let alone a mental weakness, it's, accepting that, is hard enough.
Yep. And I think there's such an intersection between race and especially for an athlete, there's so many different layers and levels of this because yes, as you said, Hannah, we're supposed to be strong and we shouldn't show our weakness. And then if you add the layer of race on top of that, it isn't always safe to show emotion. And so you walk around with the stoicism, putting on one face for the world, but then having a different experience otherwise. And it can make you feel that you really shouldn't, because if you think about stereotypes, for example, a stereotype, most Black people have this experience. I'm just going to say this, right? You see something on the news, right? And they say, oh, X person did something wrong. Most Black people are holding their breath for a moment. And then when they see that it's not a Black person, it's like, okay, great. At least it wasn't one of us, because we're walking around with this thought of, okay, there's a stereotype, and we're always afraid that somehow that stereotype's going to be confirmed. And then that just knocks you down a little bit more. And so when I think about the sense about being crazy, nobody wants to be thought of as crazy or weaker than. And like I said, that social political construct of race, which is, what does it do? It makes us see difference. And that difference, some people have more privilege and then other people don't. And so what I've done in my work is, and I mentioned this to Tony the other day, early in my work, I would talk to students about, student athletes about the blues, and I'd say, who's ever had the blues? And people raise their hands. And so that's a very different thing than to say, okay, so who's walking around with depression? Nobody wants to own that. But if I say the blues, people can relate to that. Or, those times when you're just down, you're just having a bad day, you're in your feelings, right? People can relate to that because we've all been in our feelings at one point or another. So I think we have to destigmatize by thinking about the language we use.
I agree, Joyce. I think as a Black woman, we're kind of painted as aggressive, and you can't show up to work or to practice in a bad mood because people will just look at you like, here comes the angry Black woman again. And I think that plays into the stereotypes and the mental health. Like, I'm putting my mental health to the side and everything I'm dealing with to make you comfortable. And I think that's also an issue that we deal with.
Right.
Yeah, my older sister and I talk about that because she works at a restaurant and there's like a hair policy, and she was like freak before she got the job. She was like under so much anxiety that they wouldn't hire her because she couldn't like do like conform to, like, not conform but like do the rules for their hair. So she was like under stress for a long time, and it was like I was upset about like how that is what puts her under stress. um so yeah, I thought about that when you said that.
I get that. I'm a waitress at a diner in East Setauket, Long Island. And the first time I came to the diner with my hair braided, I was very nervous about what my boss would say and my coworkers. And they've all been so great. They ask me questions. They don't, say anything that's a little like questionable. They're very wanting to know more about it. And I think in your sister's situation, I hope that was the case. But I know it's very different depending on where you are and who you're with.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. One of the things that like I pulled from that, again, sort of as an audience member here, is like the additional challenges being like fighting stereotypes and identity questions on one side, and then also sort of not like a general receptivity to having mental health concerns or issues, or a comfortable space to talk about it in social circles. Is that been an experience that you've either seen, and maybe this more sort of for Tony and Hannah as like a student athlete, that you've seen play out like in athletics on your teams, and the challenges that you guys have had, sort of more from a personal aspect, and then Joyce, maybe the clinical viewpoint as well. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, I've went to a PWI since like 6th grade, so that saying like too Black for the white kids and too white for the Blacks has been like something I've thought about. It's been like I guess like a which I guess call like an identity struggle. Um, you know, going to a PWI, then going back home to a predominantly Black community. Um, you're always like switching. I think Dr. Dewitt Parker, the term is code switching.
Code switching.
Yeah, so you like change your vernacular and how you act socially. So you kind of like struggle with like who you are really at times, especially playing lacrosse, playing a predominantly white sport. Growing up, I was the only Black kid on my club team. So summertime, it was hard for me to like really make friends because I couldn't really relate to these guys and how they lived and what they did. And even at school, like it was hard for me to relate to guys on my team, even though I went to class with them. Just because when I went home, it was just different, and it was just hard, to like have those conversations.
I agree, Tony. I'm mixed. So my mom is Black and my dad is white. So I definitely get the identity crisis, and I get playing a predominantly white sport. Growing up, almost all of my closest friends were white because I played a predominantly white sport, and I'd been friends with them because of soccer, met them through soccer. So then I came to college, predominantly white institution again, where I kind of found more of my identity, I think. Still only 2 Black girls on our team, me and my teammate and friend Renee. And I think we kind of deal with it well. We lean on each other a lot, especially during like the summertime and all the protests. I think a lot of our teammates look to us to explain things and to make things make sense. And I think to an extent, yes, we can help, but it also fell on them to do their own research and to figure things out themselves. Cause like, I'm not here to teach you everything you need to know.
Very well said. Yeah, I find that, you think about the college years, that is a time when we start to form our own identity separate and apart from our families. And so if I think about a student athlete, your identity has changed from being a high school athlete to a collegiate athlete to being a college student, a scholar. What does that mean? How do I, there's so much to figure out. And then if you're first generation, you layer that on. And that sense about being, too white for one group and too black for another group, or giving your biracial background, Hannah, the same thing. So that's another layer and another layer. And I have a colleague who says it's like trying to walk up the down escalator. It just takes a lot of effort and it's tough. And it wears you down. And so sometimes I think it can be tough because, especially if you're at a PWI, you don't know who you can talk to, who your safe people are. And you walk around feeling like you're unsafe in many ways until you find your people.
Thanks everyone for sharing that. I want to dig into the identity stuff too, and the code switching. I want to go back to something that was mentioned earlier, the term weakness. Weakness, sort of falls again in line with like the idea of stigma. I think, Hannah, you mentioned like in specific, like adding gender. So your Black male friends and how that's an additional, layer and barrier. How, and maybe Joyce, you can kick us off from more of a clinical perspective, is like this idea of framing, like, like you just said, like blues versus mental illness. How do we help our student athletes, and how do we educate our coaches and our administrators on understanding like the challenges around moving past that, like, feeling like I'm too weak, I should be able to handle this. I'm an athlete, like, I can get hit to the ground. Like what's a stressful day? How do, what sort of advice do you have as a clinician? And then to Tony and Hannah, like, what have you done personally? What have you seen your friends do to sort of combat that challenge?
I think as for coaches and administrators to normalize the fact that people have, highs and lows, that sometimes you have the blues. And I've worked closely with coaches who, if they have had some of their own experiences with mental health, professionals, or if they've had family members, they share that with the athletes. And that can be really, really helpful to normalize their experience, because then they don't feel so alone and isolated around this. So I think that's key. And then, like what we did at UAlbany was 22 years ago, was to form a liaison relationship. So in our case, we attend the monthly staff meetings. And so that's very intentional. Why? Because we're there. And then coaches can ask us questions, administrators can ask us questions. We attend games so that, athletes can ask us questions. My colleagues, Joe and Megan, at this point, Dr. Joe Montserrat and Dr. Megan Cusick Briggs, attend practices. So they're very visible. And because we are always there, we're always in athletics in one way or another, it also reduces one barrier for people to reach out to us. So we're just normal people. We're not weird, odd looking people who are going to ask them to lay down on the sofa with and have a clipboard or something, taking notes feverishly, but we're real human beings. And Kate, you mentioned my son earlier. When he was younger, he would attend games with me. He would go to functions with me. So that also made me more normal. And I think that's a step in the right direction for folks to, especially coaches and administrators, form those alliances with other people, talk about it, breaking down those barriers, asking, getting to know your athletes, not just for what they can do on the field or the court or on the mat or in the pool, but for who they are, their total experience. And what that means is you have to listen. You're not doing all the talking, but you're listening to who they are, not just what they can do for you, but the context, what life was like for them. And I think whenever you start to listen, then people start to trust and people will open up. Because a lot of people, I come from a place where everybody always says, oh, how you doing? Everybody says, fine. But I'm also from the South. I'm from North Carolina. And so people will dig a little deeper. Are you okay? You know, so you say things are fine, but you look this way. What's that about? You know, what's that disconnect? So kind of delving a little deeper, but people won't open up until they know it's safe and that you care about them as individuals and not just for what you can do to score.
I agree with that. I think being co-president of Pause, we are that liaison between, you know, coaches and student athletes, and how to try to get your, you know, your point across that like students do deal with mental health issues. And I think having Pause implemented at Stony Brook has been one of the best things. We do so many different things, and we have so many athletes that are in our group that they ask us questions and we talk to the counselors about it, and we try and be there for them so that they can be there for themselves, if that makes sense. You know, we're really trying to break the stigma, essentially, is what we try and say all the time. Like, mental health is something that a lot of people go through, and like we want to normalize it and have people get the help they need to deal with it. And we're really trying to get that point across, especially to coaches, because we were saying recently that, you know, coaches don't know what you go through when you're not at practice. And it's obviously not their job to constantly ask you every single day. Like, we don't have time for that. So kind of being your own advocate and saying, I am having a rough week. This is why I'm acting this way and the other. And really just trying to be honest with yourself and honest with the people around you, just to have everyone, you know, helping each other in the end. And I think being that person for people right now is so important, especially with the pandemic and everything else going on. And I think getting people to trust us, to trust their coaches, and to trust the counselors and everyone is so important. But I do think it is hard to trust people that don't look like you, coming from the point that, you know, if you're a Black student athlete and you want to go talk to a sports psychologist, they're all white here. And I think that is so hard to deal with, especially because I dealt with it myself. When I tore my ACL my sophomore year, my trainer set up an appointment to talk to a sports psychologist, and it was an old white man. And I, being the legit complete opposite, was just not comfortable. It was weird. I didn't want to be there. And I think if the environment was better put, I think it definitely would have executed better, but I think the idea was right. So I think one thing Pause is really trying to do is get different types of counselors and sports psychologists, just so everyone has somebody they can feel comfortable with and somebody they can trust.
Yeah, that trust piece is really important. And I think vulnerability is a big part of that trust, and it's on both sides, no matter who you're talking to. I think coaches definitely need to understand that it's okay, and student athletes too need to understand it's okay to be vulnerable. That's how you gain understanding. That's how you learn about each other, and that's how you have those conversations that you need to have. Yeah.
And if you don't mind me saying this, the other thing too, sometimes I find that coaches are a little bit concerned because if they hear that someone has the blues, or, you know, they're having some anxiety or some sadness, sometimes some coaches will think, okay, so they're not going to be able to execute. That's not at all what it means, because for most athletes, myself included, when I was an athlete, I was really good at compartmentalizing things. And so, you know, there could be things going on in your personal life that you don't take on the field of the court. But at some point, you do need to decompress and to let that out. But sometimes I guess what I'm saying is sometimes athletes don't come forward and they don't talk about it because they're afraid of any possible repercussions that might bring for them in terms of playing time or position. So I think we need to just check that a little bit too, to make sure we're not contributing to another problem.
It's such a good point, Joyce, and thanks for bringing that up. I know we did a survey a number of years ago that identified that as a major barrier for student athletes seeking help, is the repercussions from coaches who, you know, would bench that individual. And again, that's just the perception, not the coaches actually saying they would do that, but that's the fear. So a couple of the themes I heard there: trust and safety and vulnerability. I want to dig in, and actually we got a question from the audience here. And this is probably really difficult to answer because our biggest handcuffs are finances and resource. But the question ties back to the notion of, you know, seeing someone who looks like you. And Hannah, your story of seeing, you know, of going into a counseling office and seeing an older white male, and the connection isn't there. The trust and the safety is harder to build. So an attendee asked, how can athletics administrators ensure that our Black student athletes are finding counselors or mental health professionals who do look like them? So just would open that up to the group and see what thoughts there are.
Well, at UAlbany, for many years, I was the only Black female, the only Black person on the staff. But I think what administrators can do first is help the student athletes to find community. And that might not necessarily be a formal licensed counselor, but hopefully there are some other people of color, other folks from the Black community on campus. So help them to link with other people, individuals, you know, faculty, professional staff who might be of color, and draw those people into athletics. The other thing is, you know, I have no idea, Hannah, if the person you saw was culturally competent, but we want to make sure that, you know, not only our staff in athletics are culturally competent, but that the counselors on campus are culturally competent. So this means that everybody needs to do their work in a way. And just because you're a therapist doesn't mean you're culturally competent. But to make sure that that is the case. At UAlbany, we have a few counselors who have expertise in this area. I actually trained them up because they were also athletes themselves, and they knew what the pressures were. And I made sure that they were culturally competent. They're both, you know, one is an Italian man and one is a Caucasian woman, but a white woman, but for them to be culturally competent and for us to be able to talk about these things. If you don't have anyone on campus, then start to advocate to find some people who are culturally competent, or people of color, or both. I think now it's a tough time in a way because, you know, we're all dealing with budgetary crises at this point, but it's also a hot time, I think, to find those people and attract them to your campuses at the same time.
Really good point, Joyce. Hannah, a question for you that came through from the audience, and I want to also, like, while answering this question, throw in you explaining a little bit more about pause and some of the advocacy work that you even mentioned to me about you know, hiring more Black clinicians. But the question is, how has the Black student athlete huddle, excuse me, at Stony Brook helped evolve athletics and the understanding? And so just make sure also you know, explain what the Black student huddle is first, and then take the question.
Okay, so the Black Student Athlete Huddle is a group of just Black student athlete individuals from Stony Brook that meet, and you can only be Black to sit in. And it's nice because you get to see, you know, all these other different Black faces, which is so comforting, and like you kind of feel like you can be more in your element. So it's great that we have that here. And the second part, how it's evolved athletics and understanding. So I think Nia, who's like really in charge of it, she's really done a good job at advocating for us. And we had, what did she set up? She set up a protest around campus that so many athletes joined in on, so many staff members joined in on. She sets up all these different like huddle meetings talking about things that Black student athletes can take advantage of, like studying abroad. She's really advocating for us to have the equal experiences that the white student athletes have, whether we can afford it or not. And she just creates such a safe space. And I think the coaches and the staff look at it as a pro and less of a con, because it lets people that usually have a full white team like myself and I know women's lacrosse really be comfortable in their surroundings and be around their type of people.
Amazing to have that sense of community. And I know that there was a second part to the question, which I wouldn't put on any of you to answer, but we actually in our Spurs Respect conversation episode 7 had members of the conference who have like student athlete affinity groups on to talk about those different types of communities. They obviously look different at every school, but that's been something that we've seen pop up more, be supported more in the recent year and plus. So really, there's just been a lot of positive feedback on these groups. So I want to change gears a little bit. We did talk about code switching and PWIs, but I want to dig in a bit more on that. There was a study out of Kansas a few years back that recognized some of the things that you'd already mentioned, that there's a potential feeling of like hostility and alienation and insensitivity just based on a lack of diversity on campus and for Black student athletes compared to white student athletes. The concept of code switching is something that I think we've talked about a bit, but I'm just curious, what are the other things that either you've seen personally, experienced, through friends, that also a PWI can contribute to negatively impacting the mental health of Black student athletes?
A lot of Black kids at PWI institutions are on some sort of financial aid or financial scholarship. So like speaking up and speaking out about things is something that like my friends and even like I was scared to do just because of the reactions that the higher ups might get. And at the time, like, um, you know, political views and stuff like that, like lacrosse, my team in high school anyways, like politically had some very like conservative views. And being one of the only Black kids, I didn't feel like I had a voice. And when I did speak out, it was, me against, a bunch of other kids. Um, and Hannah, that stereotype you're talking about earlier, just always being angry. It's just like, oh, it's just you being you. Like, relax. It's not a big deal. Or like, I'm feeding into their point. So it was like just this constant like circle of trying to find answers or like trying to explain myself and find a voice. But turning to it was like who do I turn to? Because most of the administrators were white anyways, and the ones that weren't white, had positions that were like management or being a janitor and things like that. So it was hard to find like you said people that look like you to talk to. So you just like eventually form this shell. And, don't really talk about things.
Yeah, I have some friends here that only came to Stony Brook because of the financial aid they were getting. And, they talk about a lot. What would my life be like if I went to an HBCU? What would be different? What am I missing out on? And I think it's so sad to think about that you had to settle for something and you're not even comfortable where you are. I think it's very hard to express, like you were saying, Tony, like your emotions being Black, surrounded by white people, because they just kind of take it out of context. You have attitude for speaking your mind, or you're talking back when you're just sharing your opinion, and it's always viewed as so negative. But you're just trying to be as present and talk to people just like everyone else, that you don't get that same respect and that same being heard. So that definitely affects you, especially being out of PWI and like surrounded by white people. And I think being on a team that is also very white, what you said, Tony, having very conservative views does affect your comfortableness and how you feel. We had a new coaching staff come in last spring, and we were told, like, we really advocated to try and get a Black coach on the staff because we had one previously, but they couldn't do it. And like, obviously it's understandable, but it was very scary to know that we were getting 2 white men And we were like, oh my God, like Renee and I sat down and we're like, do you think they're racist? Like that is something that we have to consider day to day, depending on who we're dealing with and like how we have to deal with them in results. And I think that is such like a horrible thing to deal with. But, you know, my coaches are great. They're super supportive, super awesome people, but it definitely crosses your mind. Like my friends' parents, they're always at every game. Do they even like me? Like it's the little things like that that you constantly have to think about.
Like, yeah, I mean, just it's hard, like, because you're always told to like give benefit of the doubt, or when someone like slips up, it's like, oh, just a mistake, to ignore it. You're always the one that has to be understanding. But when you reach out and ask for some empathy, some sympathy, whatever it may be, it's, oh, you're irrational, you're crazy, like, and it's frustrating because like the facts are in front of you, the history is there, the information is there, and like you said, it's not on us to like present all of that. um we have that, of course, like we can give information, we can like help with clarification, but for like people to lean on you to like provide everything or explain everything, it takes a toll. It is hard.
Yes.
Yeah, and the thing that just came to mind when you were both speaking is microaggressions, and the whole nature of a microaggression is that it's not outwardly aggressive, but you feel a way about what somebody's saying, like there's an immediate reaction to it, and it's like, did I just hear, like, did I just hear that? Or why do I feel the way I do about that? Like you mentioned hair earlier, and I remember in the beginning when I, stopped relaxing my hair like 15, 20 years ago, and I, wore it natural, someone came up to me and said, you can put a Brazilian, I don't know what it was, but some sort of other product in my hair to make it straight. And I said, yes. And she said, well, that would look really pretty. And I thought, okay, so you're saying that this doesn't look professional or pretty. And I said, no, I'm fine with it the way it is. But it's that sort of thing. That's a microaggression because she's making an attribution about my hair being natural, but if I confronted it, she would be surprised that this was really offensive in a way, to say, oh, well, you should do this instead with your hair. It would look really nice if you did this. But I think, especially being at a PWI, there's, am I being exploited? Am I here only because X, Y, and Z? Or people feeling like you are only there because you're an athlete and you wouldn't be here otherwise. So feeling that sense of being exploited or feeling isolated, feeling like you're just an object that people really don't care about you. It's just, what you can do for them. And, ultimately, I think it just comes down to trust, and that can really, really be difficult. It rocks your sense of confidence, your self-esteem. And it's an everyday thing. It's not like you can take that off and have a different experience. It would be nice to, but that's not the case in our country.
Thanks for sharing that, Joyce. Microaggressions has obviously been something that we've talked a lot about in previous conversations, and just the subtle but painful and just awful consequence of that behavior. The impact of racism and social inequality, and in particular events like the killing of George Floyd and Charlottesville. I want to talk a bit about that and how events like that, in like broader events that are outside of the local community, are affecting the mental health of the Black community. And we talked about this, I think, Hannah, a little bit. Like you see athletics departments putting tweets out and statements that say, we stand behind our Black student athletes. But what are the things that you guys have experienced that athletics departments have done that help to actually ensure a sense of safety and security and support for Black student athletes, Black coaches, Black staff members? And then, like what off the, if to do it again, like how might someone do it better? What type of support can be given that is potentially lacking as well?
I can go first with this one. I think during the whole George Floyd thing, if anyone was on Instagram, there was a whole black screen trend, like post a black screen to show your support. I'm like, that's great and all, but what does it actually do for us? Nothing. So when my account, my Stony Brook soccer account, actually posted a black square and that's it, there was no talk about it, no statements were put out, I was very offended and I commented on my own page and I said, is this all we are to you? Just like black screens? Like, that's not cool. And then I think it made, obviously they got the comment, and I think it made the media and some people sit back and say like, okay, what can we actually do to support and not just show face? So later, maybe a week later, my coach got on some calls with us. He talked to us, he was really good about it, really voicing his opinion and really involving all of my coaches and all of my teammates. And he put out a statement that we came up with, that we all agreed with, that we had everybody sign. And it really showed that there was more than just a post supporting us. It was real people with real words and real thoughts that were trying their best to be our allies at the time. And then we came to school and we had this protest that the huddle actually set up. And to see the amount of people that showed up, it was almost everybody from athletics, coaches, players, even people you thought were very questionable showed up. And I think that definitely meant a lot to, the Black community here. And it definitely, showed really well for us. I think if it were to be done again, I think maybe we could get some other teams out there that didn't really show up. And if they didn't show up because of their views, then we don't want them. But if they showed up because maybe there was class conflicts or practice conflicts, maybe we could adjust that just to have more people out there to support us. But that was a really good turnout.
It's amazing. Thanks, Hannah.
So after George Floyd, I started holding forums on just like topics like microaggressions, misconceptions of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I can attest to like my team at UMBC, like I got a lot of support from my teammates. People came with like not really saying anything, like, but they came to listen. My whole thing is like listen, learn, and gain perspective. Because it just takes one view for you to like change how you think, how you interact with people. So I had teammates coming to my forums, and I also called my coach, and my coaches checked in on me, not just after George Floyd, but continuously after that. I had a lot of conversations and got very vulnerable, and that led to us as a team having discussions, watching movies, reading articles, that sort of thing, learning about issues that Black people face, so that way our team is more understanding of these issues, and it'll affect us positively, because if we're closer in that aspect, it'll help us on the field as well. And if they're learning about what it means, then that means a lot to me. So just having a great support system from my team, my coaches, and them showing that they care and they want to learn about who I am. It's been the biggest thing for me. So I guess just like having departments like focusing on like learning who their players are, trying to understand every aspect of it, being vulnerable, like asking those questions that you're scared to ask, because you need to get the answers. So yeah.
I like that, being vulnerable, because people, I think, sometimes don't say anything because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And yet, if they don't say anything or do anything, then that sends a message too. But to say, goodness, just to be vulnerable and say, this is, I don't know, this is just, awful. I had an administrator who just he cried. And he was a white man, and he was so distraught by it. He just started crying. And that was okay. And we talked about it, you know, because that was him being very vulnerable. But I think, you know, like on some campuses, having a breathing space support group, which is breathing space, basically just allowing some space for folks of color, BIPOC people to come together and just talk. Having another space for people who might see themselves as allies or accomplices. I like the term accomplice, because an ally might post something, but an accomplice, you're right in there with me. You know, you're hanging in there with me, and you don't decide to just walk away when it gets tough. So having a different group for accomplices. Some of the other things, reaching out, like some of my colleagues, at one point we had one team that, you know, were all in ISOCORE, you know, isolation because of COVID, basically. And so my colleagues, well, actually Megan decided, look, I'm going to take some healthy snacks and some healthy drinks. And she made up these little care packages for all of the people on that particular team. So going above and beyond in those ways to just say, look, you know, I feel for you. And so that was that last example was a COVID related example, but not at the same time, because all of this was happening together and people were feeling isolated and they're also in quarantine. But being vulnerable, allowing yourself to be vulnerable and say, I don't know, I don't even know where to start. That's better than nothing.
Yeah, that's great advice, Joyce. So one final question. I got one for you, Joyce, to start, and then we'll finish with Hannah and Tony. So for all the coaches and administrators, which we have over 85 on the call listening right now, which is fantastic, who are here, that exact reason, want to be better support systems to our Black student athletes. What is like one or two pieces of really tangible advice that they can turn around and start doing as soon as possible?
As soon as possible, I think if you don't have connections with CAPS, begin to connect with CAPS so that, and not just when things are really tough, but at the beginning of a year, for example. So like with compliance, making sure that people know who the CAPS individuals are. I do have another thought too, which is just to one program once a year when you bring an outside speaker in is not enough. You know, then you just check it off and say, look, we've done what we're going to do. Back to what you said, Tony, it needs to be intentional. So yes, if you want to bring in an outside speaker, fine, but you need to have other services and programs and supports wrapped around that. If you don't know who the people are in the campus community, or if there are no people in the campus community, look outside of the campus community. If you start talking to people, everybody knows who the supports are. And then you can help to link the athletes to those individuals who might not be able to provide the counseling, but they might know somebody who can provide the counseling. So I guess that was two things. I'm sorry, Kate.
We'll take two. No, two is better than one. Okay, and then Tony and Hannah, you can take this either way. One is, you know, what advice would you give to your Black student athletes or student athletes of color that are listening who have faced the obstacles we've identified through the last hour, and reasons to not seek help or not, seek professional help for counseling, and then also, you know, student athletes that are on the call that are accomplices or allies, our white student athletes, like what advice can you give to them on how to support our student athletes of color, Black student athletes that are facing mental health challenges? So either one.
I would speak for everybody dealing with mental health, because I think regardless of your race, it does affect you. My advice would be to find anybody that you are comfortable with, that can support you, and to just lay it all out. As long as they, mental health wise, are okay to accept everything you are saying, find someone that can help you through your dark days. And if they can only take a certain amount because of stuff they're dealing with, then go with them to somebody else or a professional that could help both of you. You know, don't hide, don't keep it to yourself, because at one point it will become too much for you to hold yourself. So just try and be vulnerable and try and put yourself out there, because that's the only way you're going to get help.
It's awesome. Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah, with the mental health, like everyone's different. Um, so it takes time. You may have to approach it a different way. It may take a number of times, it may not. The main thing is to be positive and persistent, but also patient, because you are your own self. You're an individual, so you're of course going to do things differently from everyone else. Um, and for the allies, just continue to reach out and do what you can to educate yourself. Um, Obviously you have your own life to live, but if you try and one day just read something, call a friend, just ask them a question, be vulnerable, be present, just listen. Um, Take that step, because it may take you somewhere you never thought it would. So keep an open mind, um, and, keep being positive, keep being an ally.
Those are great ones, Tony. Thanks to the both of you. All right, well, with 2 minutes to spare, I just want to wrap up and thank Joyce and Tony and Hannah very publicly on behalf of everybody here, the America East, and through the membership. Stepping into these spaces and having these conversations is not a small ask, and we're so incredibly appreciative for you to share your perspectives, your expertise with the America East community. So thanks so much for being here. We would love to ask if you would all take a post-event survey. It helps us inform these conversations going forward. We'll continue. We're in the middle of planning episode 9 and 10. And so please fill out the survey that Marcus just dropped in the chat. And then also sign up for our MindWise webinars, where we'll dig more into mental health and give more resources for our coaches and administrators to try to support our student athletes of all colors and all genders. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate you being here. Joyce, Tony, Hannah, you're the best. And everyone have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Take care.